Hello and welcome to the Renovate podcast. My name is Stephanie Schell,
My name is Aaron Pullen.
and today we're going to talk about, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about relativism and what truth really is. I think that it's something that growing up I never gave much thought to. In college I was a philosophy major and I still didn't put much thought in it. I thought it was kind of stupid, but because I was in the seminary at the same time, it was a requirement. So I just did the requirement, fulfilled that requirement. And we talked a lot about ideas and what ideas did. And I didn't believe it. I thought, an idea is an idea. What does it matter what Kant or Nietzsche said? And the more I've been out in the world, talking with people, in my line of work, I'm the youth minister at St. Joe's, and talking with the youth even as young as middle school. And I've really begun to see how much of a struggle people are having in their daily lives because of this idea of truth. What is truth? And so I've really begun to realize that relativism is what Pope Benedict said was the dictatorship of relativism. And I think that that's been such a scary idea for me because it's all-consuming. It's something that, as a philosophy major even, I couldn't see it in my own life. I couldn't see how much I had bought into relativism and the relativistic ideas.
Oh, when we were discussing this topic earlier, I realized that I don't give it much thought either, and that's really frightening. It's something that creeps in and I don't even notice that it's just pervading my life.
It really is, and I think that that's one of the reasons that C.S. Lewis, in his book entitled, or his work entitled The Poison of Subjectivism, says that, of relativism, he says, well, it will certainly end our species and damn our souls, because ultimately it destroys who we are. We give up little bits and pieces of who we are. We no longer can say what is right and wrong. We can't approach people and encourage them or exhort them to do something good, because good becomes something that is, in my eyes, alone. I am the center of the universe. I make that a truth claim, but that truth claim only applies to me. It doesn't apply to you or to anyone else.
So then we can't tell anybody, oh, good for you, or you shouldn't be doing that because what's true for you might not be true for me. That sounds really, sounds dangerous.
It is really dangerous, because ultimately what relativism says is that it is certain that there is no Here we go. It is true for everybody that there is no truth for everybody. Essentially, relativism is self-refuting. You're making a truth claim, a universal truth claim, that there is a universal truth in saying that. So you're contradicting yourself when you make that claim. And most people won't make that claim.
But they so firmly believe it, don't they? And that's
Yeah.
how they live their lives.
And most people won't go so far as to say that there is no absolute truth, because 1 + 1, I can take one piece of paper and another piece of paper, and now all of a sudden I have two pieces of paper. The stuff that is scientifically observed, they will not take that as an absolute truth. But for the things that aren't scientifically proven, that there's not an empirical way to gauge it or measure it or to evaluate it, that's where they really begin to fall into that idea of relativism. I like to look at Hitler, for example, and most people won't take Hitler as a good person. They won't take his actions as good. Mm-hmm. In killing millions of people. And so that's when I'm approaching someone who's relativistic, I begin there. Because I say, well then, what do you think of Hitler? Was Hitler right to kill those Jews? And most people will have to say, no, he wasn't right. So at that point, you've already begun to say, there is some truth that is outside, that I can actually say is true. That killing people, that murder is not subjective. I can't go around and say, well, I want to murder someone, and therefore you can't judge me, you can't say that I'm wrong.
So it's basically selective relativism. This is wrong for everyone, but you can choose what to do normally. It's not consistent, and that bugs me.
Yeah, I think that, as you said, it's inconsistent. Because we look at a lot today. Tolerance was a big thing on the campus that I went to for college. They talked constantly about tolerance. We need to be tolerant of other people's ideas, of differences in race and color and religion and faith. Okay, that's great. But ultimately it becomes a militaristic tolerance. We're tolerant of people as long as they believe the same things we believe in. They have the same ideas, the same way of life that we do.
That doesn't sound like real tolerance to me.
It isn't. But that's the way people approach tolerance so frequently, is I can't say something because I'm afraid that I'm going to be dubbed intolerant. But if tolerance, I love the example of Mother Teresa, who she did not agree with the gay lifestyle. She didn't agree with the premise of that, their promiscuity, but yet she was the first person in the United States, I believe, through her Missionaries of Charity to open up, or at least in New York, to open up an AIDS hospice. She did not agree with them, but yet she welcomed them in. She helped them out in their time of great need. And that's a beautiful example of what tolerance really should be. I don't agree with what you're doing, and I'm going to I may even let you know that through words and through actions, but I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to backlash. I'm not going to, fight you militaristically and say, you have to, believe this. You can't take away my right to whatever that is. And this is where I think the moral relativism is so much more pervasive in our day, and so much more is more problematic, because we look around at Nazism, for example, and we see that Hitler came up with an idea. He had an idea of this perfect race, but no one felt like they could say to him he was wrong. There were a group of people who did, but many people just kind of went with it without questioning, and they were led down this road that killed millions of people. And
they were like sheep blindly following their leader no matter what he was doing.
And and that's the reason I think C.S. Lewis was so prophetic in a certain sense, is that he, when he talked about relativism destroying our society, or not even just our society but our species, is that who's to say what is right, what is wrong? We look today, for example, at the euthanasia that is going from state to state. Who's to say that a life is sacred anymore? Who's to say that my life is more valuable than your life, or vice versa?
But it's disguised as a good thing, right? Like they can have less pain, die, as they say, quote unquote, with dignity, because I don't know, they're not. Because sometimes when people suffer for a long time, they get in a very fragile state. So it seems like a good thing. But why is it not a good thing? Because God is the author of life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so problematic because there is no guideline. There is nothing keeping us in check. I can then say that my mother wanted me to take her off of life support when really she wanted to continue to live, because there was still a chance that she would pull out of it. Mm-hmm. And we'll never know that. But moral relativism, it's oftentimes very intellectually lazy.
What do you mean by that?
We may even know that it's not true, that it's not good to do any action, but we don't want to go through that work, that change. We don't want to actually be held accountable for our actions, so we make it true in my mind. The example that comes to mind here is the pervasive sexual movement that we've experienced in the country over the past 50 or 100 years, is that all of a sudden we don't have to be held accountable, because you can't tell me that premarital sex is wrong. And so I can go out and I can have sex with whoever I want, whenever I want, because my truth is my truth. And you can't enforce that upon me. When maybe there is an actual good to abstinence before marriage, maybe there is good to a monogamous relationship, but we don't want to be held accountable for that.
And it involves self-control, which is highly unpopular.
Yeah, exactly. It involves self-control, it involves discipline, it involves change, oftentimes. When there have been many times that I've looked at something through a relativistic lens and was happy with it until I realized that I was, going about any given topic via a relativistic lens. And
how were you able to recognize that was happening?
I think it was through being open and honest, by seeking the truth, and by studying. Today it's so much easier to pop on Netflix than it is to read a book. And it's easier to even read a novel than it is to read something with substance, something that's going to challenge us and give us, make us think on our own and think about our actions. And so I think that it's a combination of, for me, it's what other people have said that have challenged me.
Do you have any good suggestions about good books to read to help us recognize relativistic?
I've used, the past 3 popes have talked a lot about relativism and their harms. As I said at the beginning, Pope Benedict talked about the dictatorship of relativism. John Paul II talked a lot about relativism. Benedict in his own way, or Francis has talked about relativism in his own way. Christophonic has done a lot of work on relativism as well. And what I love about Christophonic is he's so relatable. He's young, he's vibrant, he's doing the vlog scene. He goes around from conference to conference, and a lot of his talks are recorded. So if you don't even want to pick up a book, you can find those resources, a lot of them online now. At least Christophonic, you can find, bits and pieces of the more recent popes as well on relativism and its harms. So I think that
And those
are
on YouTube, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are on YouTube. In preparation, I used Christophonic a lot, kind of just to refresh my mind and to try to find a few examples. And so I think that, and they're engaging. You can sit and do whatever you want while you're engaging your mind. You're engaging your intellect and really trying to form your conscience so you understand the reasons why we don't think relativism is right. And that's what I love about some of the vlogs and the podcast and YouTube, is it makes it more accessible to someone who's busy, who's on the go. We have it on our phones all the time. And instead of, take a few minutes every day and just begin to form your conscience and to develop those habits that help better us and better the world around us.
It sounds like if our consciences are formed only by what's easiest and close by, like Netflix you mentioned, or television, movies, then we won't be getting the correct idea of how to avoid a relativistic outlook on life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's the reason relativism has become so popular, is because of the media and because it doesn't really challenge us. It allows us to be complacent to our bad ways of life, to our passions, to it's all right to get drunk. It's all right to have premarital sex. It's all right to, be whoever we want to be. Our sexual identity lies in, what we see ourselves as opposed to our dignity. Our person is so much more than just our sexual orientation, our sexual nature, our passions. And society, the media, has really enforced relativism in our world today in such a deeply profound way.
And not in a good way.
No, because everything is relativistic. And that's the reason it's so hard for us to see in ourselves, is because we're absorbed in it. We're in this petri dish that this is all we know. Christophonic made a quote of Obama in his first election. And whether you like him or not, whether you support him, whether you agree with his policies, I found this quote on sin. One of the interviewers, or one of the reporters, was asking President Obama, then, he wasn't president, but he said, the reporter was asking him, what is sin? And he said that sin is not acting in alignment with one's personal beliefs. So my sin is only confined to myself. And
so what's a sin for me might not be a sin for you. It just depends on what you believe.
Exactly.
Huh.
But and that's really attractive, because then I can live my life the way I want to, and no one can tell me that I'm living it incorrectly. But it's problematic because when we look at how it's applied, it can't be sustained. Because, okay, you take a serial rapist, for example. he believes that his actions are right. So if he believes that his actions are right, and truth is only is in his eyes, raping someone was true, then I can't hold him accountable for his actions. I can't say that he is wrong, and therefore I can't say that he is accountable. I can't put him in jail. I can't put him on trial, because he was doing what he thought was right.
That
And
just sounds messed up.
It's terrifying.
That doesn't work for me.
It's terrifying. It doesn't work in its essence, its practicality, because there are actions that are morally wrong. There are truths that we must respect each other. Every life is sacred. And relativism takes that away. It takes away that meaning to life, because there's no longer a certain meaning. I make up my own meaning, and that's really quite empty and hollow. Then we're constantly searching more and more for a meaning. And with relativism, we find emptiness. But when we find that there is an objective truth, that truth isn't just something that I make up in my mind, then we find there is actual meaning in that. Our life's given purpose. We have an actual mission that's outside of my own sphere, my own reality.
So why does relativism bring emptiness?
Because it's all about me. It's not about others. It's about my passions. And passions are good, but they're good when they're properly ordered. When my intellect the truth has some guiding force behind it. It allows me a place to go. It gives me that ability to have an identity outside of my actions. Because I like to look at athletes and pick on athletes. Nothing against them. But so many of the high school kids that I work with will associate their identity with, I'm an athlete, I'm a football player, I'm a kicker, I'm a soccer player. But what happens when they get an injury, like a torn ACL, or they get too many concussions, and they can no longer play a sport?
Then they've lost their identity.
They've lost their identity. And with accepting that there is an objective truth, accepting that there is truth that is beyond me, that gives me an identity beyond the things I do. It gives me an identity beyond my sin, beyond my faults and my strengths. And so it raises me up beyond my good and my bad, and gives me a much more beautiful dignity, a much fuller purpose.
That all sounds really great, but it's also very countercultural. How do we go about instigating that type of change in our society?
I think it takes courage. We have to realize, as I said before, that truth isn't just true for me. And so the idea of tolerance is something that we have to be tolerant, but that tolerance can't look the way media says it. By being tolerant, it means I still love that person, but it doesn't mean I say, okay, go ahead and do whatever you want to do. That, you support their actions wholeheartedly.
But doesn't it seem as if maybe you don't love them as much, or you just don't love them at all, if you don't say, whatever you want to do is great. Whatever you want to do, I accept that.
That's the way a lot of people would see it. But would the AIDS patients, who Mother Teresa and the Missionaries of Charity in New York City, would they see it that way? Would the people that they were serving see it as Mother Teresa hates them? I would dare to say that that is not the case.
She was
because
serving them.
she was serving them. She met them where they were at. She still supported them in their need, but she called them on. She also spoke that truth with love. It was shown in her actions. It was shown in her mannerism, in her disposition. And I think that those all, give high praise to the fact that it can be done. That we don't have to just shun someone because they aren't doing something that we see as being a moral deprivation, that they're doing an action that isn't in line with truth. But it's our duty to love each other, but we have to then address what is love. And I think that that's a talk for another time, because it's such a huge topic.
Yeah.
But to love isn't just to go along with whoever we love, because that's not true love. Because I'm not going to let someone run off of a cliff because that's what they want to do out of love.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I can't just go along with that, but I have to say, hey, this isn't good. I have to do things in my power to help them not to run off of a cliff.
They might not appreciate you at that time, though, right? Because they want to keep running.
Yeah.
Or whatever they're doing. They might not appreciate that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not always going to speak the truth is never going to be popular. But because it calls people on, as I said, it's intellectually lazy to be relativistic. But ultimately, relativism and Christianity can't go hand in hand. You have to be one or you have to be the other. If you're gonna go all out, you can't and be honest about what you're saying. Mm-hmm. There is no relativism with Christianity, because to be relativistic says sin is only sin to me, therefore I don't sin. Because why are we going to make something that we do a sin? And therefore I don't need a savior. If there is a God, there has to be absolute truth then. We have to believe that there is a God. There is a need for a savior. Therefore, we are sinners. There is something that is qualified as sin, whether we like it or not. But as you can see, it's challenging, because all of a sudden, I can't do what I want. I'm not God making up my own set of moral norms for myself, but that there is something higher. There is a natural law that governs.
You mentioned earlier that when we were discussing this topic earlier, that true freedom comes from following moral laws, following the natural law that's written on our hearts. And again, that's a very unpopular idea in our culture. It's about, what do you want to do? What you want to do, okay, you can go ahead and do that because that's right for you, as you were saying. But true freedom comes. And why is that? Why do we have to follow rules?
I go back to C.S. Lewis, or at least I believe it was C.S. Lewis. I'm going to attribute it to him. That used the analogy of a playground that's built on the side of a cliff. And the children just kind of huddle together because they don't know where that boundary is, how far to run. And so they're scared, they're timid, they don't want to go off. Because if Billy throws the ball too far and I'm backpedaling, I may fall off the cliff without realizing it. But when there's a fence, when there's a gate, when there is that truth that kind of guides us and governs us, we can play freely. We know the boundaries, we know the area in which we can play comfortably, and we can then play freely. We aren't huddled. We aren't scared because we know what the boundaries are. We know how to play in a way that's fulfilling and gives us happiness.
That's a great analogy.
And so we are those children. Every person is that child, and we're going to huddle around. We'll spread our wings, but we aren't sure exactly where we're at, and we kind of go out, we feel around, but then we're scared. We aren't sure what's good, what's going to give us purpose, how to live that fulfilled life. And in my experience, and I've seen in the lives of the saints, in their experience, some of them have lived incredibly wild lives and thought they were incredibly happy. But when we're intellectually honest, when we're honest about who we are and where we're at in life, we realize that sin is actually not making us happy, that going around and having sex with 25 people isn't making us happy, but it's really actually leading us towards that emptiness that I was talking about, because we don't have that purpose, we don't have that objective goal that we're moving towards. It's just subjective, it's just relating to me.
I think a lot of people don't realize that that's what they're missing. And they don't know what they keep trying to fill that emptiness that they feel with all those extra things, to fill that God-shaped hole in their hearts with a lot of extra stuff that's not going to bring them fulfillment.
No, and I look at the saints. I mean, take my word for it, don't take my word for it. Look at the saints, though. Look at Augustine. He huge playboy. He did just about everything under the sun. And when he actually became intellectually honest, when he actually looked at his life and said, this is not in accord with truth, and changed his ways, he was more fulfilled. He was more filled with joy, more filled with peace and contentment. And you look at any number of saints who experienced the world and all that it had to offer by way of vices, by way of sin, and when they took a step back, they realized how empty it really was. How much they're making themselves God was leading them nowhere. And so I think that there's really 3 problems with relativism. And we've kind of talked about them throughout our time. But the first one of them is that it doesn't really work in the world. It doesn't, as I said, the example of Hitler. Mm-hmm. Or you could even say something to the extent of looking at school. You're writing a paper. You've spent countless hours on the paper. Mm-hmm. You turn the paper in, and it was worthy of an A. You had all of the right facts. It was used proper grammar, all of the things that a great A+ paper would take. And the professor tells you that I am going to now grade these papers according to the order that I received them. The first one that it was handed in is going to get an A. The second one is going to get a B. The third one is going to get a C. The fourth one is going to get a D and then an F. But you were the last one to turn your paper in. And so you get an F on your paper.
Not fair.
Yeah, it's not fair. And, it's not a matter of even necessarily, you can take God out of that equation, really. It's a matter of fairness. That that there is a truth to, we should get a fair pay for the amount of work that we put in, and the quality of the work that we put into, in this case, a paper.
Uh-huh.
And most people would not, would agree with that.
Yes.
So it doesn't work in the real world, being one of the problems. It's self-contradicting. As I said before, it is absolutely true for everyone that there is no absolute truth for everyone, is a self-contradicting claim. And you don't have to use those words, but a relativist, if you're going to be relativist, that's what you're saying, is that it is absolutely true for everyone that there's absolutely no truth for everyone. Therefore, don't tell me what to do. Don't get in my way.
Doesn't sound good.
And yeah, we can't contradict. It's one of the greatest principles of philosophy. Is the principle of non-contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't contradict. And thirdly, we are not God. We do not make our own identity. We can't have each individual person being a God.
Right.
And that is what...
Why not, though?
Because... Why did you ask me that?
Because I like to stir the pot, you know this.
But ultimately, there is a God. Look at St. Thomas Aquinas. He has 5 proofs for God's existence. And clearly, we are not the cause of all that is. But by the very definition of God, we are not him. God is the greatest being that we can ever imagine. And for some people, they'd like to say that, but the greatest possible being would be the being that created everything. And the being that loves perfectly, the being that is perfectly wise, the being that is perfectly powerful. And last time I checked, I've not met any one of those people. As much as I'd like to be that person, I am not. And sorry, Stephanie, but you aren't that either. So...
Oh, too bad.
So first of all, God, we aren't that perfect being. That greatest possible being that we can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So we are not that God. We don't have, by the very, as I said, it contradicts. So we can't, if we're God, then we make the truth for everyone, it would seem to me. That, okay, I say that 1 + 1 = 5. Therefore, you can't tell me that 1 + 1 = 2.
Oh, yeah?
Prove it to me. Make it happen.
Well, you were showing earlier with the papers, you look at it and you can see the evidence 1 and 1 is 2.
Yeah, exactly.
But people like to say, oh no, for me though, 1 and 1 is 5. And then we just tend to let that be. Okay, you say that. Okay. And we just accept that so easily, don't we?
But do we, in that case, that's that relativism that most people won't hold. That scientifically proven or mathematically proven truths, most people aren't going to go with.
No,
So,
but that's what they apply to a lot of other things,
But
right?
then
Using
you
that
have
same
to.
kind of rule.
But then you have to say that there's something different between mathematical or scientific truths and truths of morality or truths that can't be proven in the scientific methodology. And so I think that you have to separate the two of there is truth, but there's a difference in the way that you attack the two truths. And if there are very few people that are going to object to like Hitler. But when in those cases, you just have to let them go, because they're too closed-minded. They're holding too tightly to their relativistic beliefs to see its fault, to see that Hitler was in fact wrong and was committing murder and genocide. And so we have to let them go, because there's nothing you can say or do in that moment to convince them.
So do we just entrust them to God's care?
You argue to the point that you've done your best possible job, but yeah, we aren't God. We can't change their minds if they're going to be militaristically relativist. They aren't going to change their minds. But that's the reason, ultimately, we try to catch them early. We try to teach that there is a truth from an early age. We try to... We don't say, oh, we'll let you decide if murder is right or wrong. Yeah, when you're 25,
no.
As opposed to when you're 2 years old. You know, we have to form those right and wrong decisions early, because otherwise it becomes rampant. It becomes something that people aren't willing to accept.
That's a very popular idea. I'll just let them decide when they get old enough to make that choice.
Well, why not? If truth is relative to them, who am I to tell my child that it is, raise them in any particular faith, or to tell them that it is wrong to steal? Mm-hmm. And this is the problem with it, is this, getting back once again to C.S. Lewis, it destroys society, because it did. 25 years ago, people would have said, oh, yeah, I'm going to tell my kids that X action is wrong. But now we're so open-minded to what truth is that we just let them decide for themselves. And it's this infinite, it's a regress of what truth actually is and what we can tell people truth is.
I've heard the quote before, sometimes people are so open-minded that all their brains fall out. That sounds funny maybe, but I think it's true.
And it is, and I think that, relativism ultimately is intellectually lazy. It is not doing the research, it's not wanting to be held accountable for our actions, and so we choose the lower road. We don't want to be held to a higher standard, so we choose the lowest road that we can, which is relativism, and I make my own truth, therefore forget the rest of you. Don't tell me how to live. Don't challenge me, because I want to live my life freely. But in that freedom, there really is emptiness.
Was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I think that my encouragement for everyone is to be honest. Honest with themselves. Honest with, okay, why do I do what I do? Why do I believe what I believe? First of all, so look inward at yourself. See where you're being relativistic. See where you aren't willing to change, and so you're willing to bite the bullet on relativism. And then second of all, be courageous when speaking to people. Be understanding as Mother Teresa was, and loving of them. Treat them with the dignity that they're owed. But don't allow them to continue to walk down a path that is going to lead them to emptiness, to sin, to all sorts of things. So be courageous. Stand up for the truth. Speak the truth. It won't be popular. You know, Christ said, you know, if you follow me, if you speak the truth, I am the truth, you aren't going to be liked. You're going to run into opposition. Time and time again, and in a world that is relativistic, it's going to be all the more so. But have that courage. You know, find people like Christophonic, listen to them, tap into their resources. Tap into the resources of Francis and Benedict and John Paul II. And be willing to change, ultimately. Because that's the times I've bitten hardest into relativism are the times I haven't been willing to change my own perspective, or because I haven't wanted to be seen as a hater. So I pray that everyone listening to this, if you've liked it, if there's something good in this message, share it with others. Share the truth with others. Have that courage to stand up and to go against the crowd. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for talking with us today. We learned a lot. I know I learned a lot. Be sure to like and subscribe our channel. And what else did you do?
Post it on your all of your social media sites, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Post it and put out this message. Put out the message of truth that we are providing through the Renovate group here in the Tri-Cities.
So, like and share. Can't say it enough.